Today I have 3 fantastic, fabulous, sparkly cards for you, showing you 3 different techniques you can add sparkle to your cards. It's Verity here at my YouTube channel and blog Pretty Little Button, where I make paper crafting tutorials for the everyday crafter. So let's get started. The first technique is going to be using Wow Sparkles glitter with stencils to create a really sparkly background. So for this card, I am going to be using the Altenew Tiny Bubbles stencil and 2 fabulously new, beautiful sparkles from Wow embossing powder. Now these are just glitter, fine glitter, no embossing powder actually in these. So you will need to either use an adhesive to use the sparkles or use like an embossing paste. You can mix it with clear embossing powder or another colour of embossing powder to then heat emboss it. So the 2 I'm using is the graphite and the brilliant silver. Now I absolutely love this graphite, it is beautiful. To use them with stencils we need to use some adhesive. So I'm going to create a full sparkly background and I'm using Picket adhesive sheets. This is a really lovely thin adhesive to add to cardstock. Now I did try this with my regular thick width double-sided adhesive tape, and I found that that was a bit too strong with my stencil and I couldn't get it off my stencil very well, and that meant I got a lot of adhesive over my actual stencil. So I'm using Picket adhesive sheets because it's a much more thinner adhesive. It gives you this sticky surface to actually allow the glitter to stick to, but you aren't going to worry about your stencil becoming too tacky to it and not being able to remove it from your cardstock. So I've applied the Picket adhesive sheets just to one side of the cardstock and I'm just trimming off the excess so I'm not wasting any of my sheet really. Once I've done that, I can then remove the release papers on the side with the adhesive. Now you do have to be careful with this adhesive because it is a thinner adhesive. It may tear or pull, so you might just want to burnish it down first. Now I didn't do that, and later on you'll see a couple of patches where there wasn't actually any adhesive. So now I'm just applying the Tiny Bubbles Altenew stencil down over the top, just tapping it lightly on so it keeps it in place. And the first sparkles I'm going to use is the graphite, and this is a gorgeous, a lovely sort of gunmetal, dark silver, black glitter, and it's really stunning. So I'm just tipping a little bit over there because glitter goes a long way, as you'll know. You'll get it everywhere. It looked like after I'd done this I was about to go out to a rave with body glitter all over my arms, but hey ho, I do love the sparkle. So once I've done that, I'm just using the release paper to push the glitter down into the stencil so I don't get too much on my fingers, and then I'm using a dryer cloth just to wipe the glitter off the stencil. And here I am now just pulling off the stencil, and as you can see there is a beautifully gorgeous glittery bubble look to this card. I got a little bit of at the top, some glitter, not a nice smooth appearance of the stencil because I might not have burnished the stencil down very well and it went underneath. So now I've peeled the stencil off, I've still got a lot of adhesive still exposed, so I can now add another glitter over the top, and I'm using Brilliant Silver, which is a gorgeous silver, very fine glitter, and this is a great one to have as one of your basic staple glitters in your collection. So I'm just covering this over, and this is where you can see I've got a couple of little patches where the adhesive didn't take, and obviously if there's no adhesive the glitter's not going to stick to it, but in the end I covered it up with just a few sequins later on so nobody would really notice. So once I've done that, I go over with the release paper just to help burnish that glitter into the paper. It makes sure that it sticks down really well, but you get this beautiful sparkly shine of a background, and you can really see the stencil bubble look that you can get in the background. So I'm going to talk through how I finish this card off later on, but let's now go on to the second technique, and this technique is where we use foils to add some lovely sparkly shine. So I've removed my foam pad from my Misty because I'm going to be using a cling stamp here, and this is the chevron stamp from PinkFresh Studios. All the products used in today's video will be linked in the description box below if you do want to check any of them out. Now I'm just removing one of the chevrons because I don't want it completely foiled in this pattern. So once I've picked it up with my MISTI tool, I can open my window door and then just remove one of those chevrons. Now to add foil, we need to allow the foil to adhere to something. To do that with stamping, we need to first of all stamp this in clear embossing ink, and then once we've done that, we can then cover it with Wow bonding powder. So Wow bonding powder is very, very fine. It looks similar to embossing powder, but when you heat set it, it remains sticky and tacky for a period of time. So that allows you to use it as an adhesive substrate. So you could also add your glitters and your sparkles over bonding powder, but today I'm just going to be using Fab Foils over the bonding powder. So I'm just stamping this pattern down a couple of times to get a really good impression. Because it's quite a solid stamp, I want to ensure I get a good coverage, and then I'm covering it with bonding powder. So the Fab Foil I'm going to be using on this card is silver. I went for a very silver black kind of colour scheme for all of these cards, with a little added gold later on. So I'm just trimming a bit of the foil off, so I've got it ready for when I need it. Now I find with bonding powder you could melt the whole of this design first, but you need to ensure that it remains tacky. So I like to do it in stages, and I just melt a little bit of the bonding powder at a time, and then I can add the foil just to that little bit of area. Once that's adhered, I can then melt another bit of the bonding powder, add the foil, and I keep on doing this until the whole pattern's done. Now the bonding powder will be quite hot to touch, so I just gently place the foil down to begin with because I don't want to burn my fingers, just gently tapping to ensure it adheres. A little bit of time to cool down, but it will still remain tacky, and then I can really press it down into that bonding powder, and I use my bone folder to burnish it in. Now make sure that it's cooled a little bit before you start burnishing it in, because if the powder is still quite hot, it might move and squidge when you're burnishing it with your tool, and that might change the design of your stamping image when it's foiled. So just bear that in mind. Give it a little bit of time to cool down so it's still tacky, but it's not hot that it's going to start moving that melted powder underneath. And I'm being quite gentle because, again, I don't want to move the powder underneath that I've heated. I want to keep that stamp design nicely. Once I've got a good adherence, I can then remove the foil, and you'll see that I have a lovely foiled silver design where I did that. I'm just going to repeat this so you can see what I'm doing again. So I'm heating up a certain area of that design. Once it's done, once it's melted, I add the foil over the top, just gently tapping it down whilst it's still hot. Once it's cooled a little bit, I can then use my bone folder to burnish it in, being gentle so I don't distort the stamped design. And I keep repeating this until I've gone around the whole of the stamped design, and then I do the middle part as well. And just lifting up that middle part, you can see I have a beautiful diamond block design. Okay, so I'll finish that later on. We'll go on to the third technique now, and this is going to be using melted powder with embossing glitter. So melted powder allows you to create sort of 3D embellishments or 3D mixed media for your paper crafts, for your crafting, for your cards. So I'm going to use it to create some stars, some 3D stars on my card. Now you can get these melted cases, tinfoil cases from Wow, and they're great because they're a decent size. They've got enough depth, but they're not too deep. So when you come to melt, you've got plenty. Your heat tool is going to be able to melt that quite nicely. Now I find I picked this up from looking at from watching Marion when she uses it, had a little spout because it allows you to then pour the liquid out a lot easier later on. Just fold the tip to create your spout. Now, good idea is to use a metal spatula because remember we don't want to add any static into our embossing glitter later. So I'm just adding about 3 spatulas of the melted powder. Now this you've got to judge depending on how much you are going to create, how deep you want your embellishments. But for me, I'm just using about 3 spatulas. And then I'm adding some embossing glitter, and this is black Twinkle embossing glitter. So I'm adding 3 parts of that because I want it a really deep, rich colour. Now when you come to melt this, you need to melt it from beneath. Now the melted powder is very, very fine. If you do it from the top, it's going to blow away. It's going to blow all off and it'll blow all in your face really. So melt it from underneath. Now I do most of this off screen because I'm limited on the space I have to put my heat gun underneath this with the video. But just to show you that I'm heating it from underneath, and it does take a little bit of time for it to start melting and mixing between the melt powder and the black Twinkle. So as you can see, I've just brought it back in, having melted most of that now off screen. I'm just going over the top just to really make sure I mix it in and it really melts well. Once that's ready, I can then bring my mould over. So these are some silicone moulds I just got off of Amazon, I think, and these are stars. So I'm holding my heat gun over the liquid as I'm pouring it to ensure it continues to pour nicely and it continues to be melted. And I'm just pouring this into the three stars roughly evenly. Depends how good you are at this. I also found that when I was doing this, I got a little drip on the top of the actual mould and it formed a little bead. And I found that this little bead was great because I thought, why not use this to create my own kind of matching embellishments, little drops, little circles with the melted powder. So what I did was I went and mixed some more of that powder, melted it again, and then it added a few more drops, but adding it onto the top of the silicone tray. Now I found when I took out these stars, they weren't the best shape. I hadn't really allowed the melted powder really to get into the shape of the mould. What's great though is if you're not happy with them, just stick them back in your tinfoil tray, put your heat back on them, remelt them and then re-pour it. So you haven't got to worry that you're going to waste those efforts, all that powder that you used, all the embossing glitter that you use, because if you're not happy with it, just stick it back in that tray, remelt it. And if you're thinking, oh, I'm not happy on this at all today, that's fine. Put it in that tray, leave it for another day and come back to it, because you can remelt it at any point and then you can re-pour it. You can even change and re-pour it into a different mould if you prefer. Second time round, I got a much better shape to the stars and I was really happy with them. Now sometimes it depends on the shape and the powder you use. You might want to just go back over quickly with the heat tool to smoothen the top out. Sometimes it also brightens and glistens the appearance more so. So I'll just show you a little close up of one of those stars, and it's got loads of little flecks of glitter in it that you can see in the light. And I just really loved how these turned out. I thought they were really adorable and cute. So to put these onto the card, I've added a card panel to a white card base, just foam mounting that for a little bit of dimension, and then I'm using some liquid adhesive to adhere these down. You want a strong adhesive because these will have a bit of weight to them. You want a strong adhesive like liquid glue to ensure they actually adhere well and they stay on the front. I also added a couple of heat embossed sentiments to the front of the card on some black card strips. These come from an Altenew stamp set, and then to finish it off I added a load of gold sequins as well as all of those little black sort of melted drops, as you could say, of blank Twinkle onto the card, which just matches really, really well. For the stenciled glitter card I added my favourite things Cheers die cut, which I think may be discontinued, so I've included a link to another one that's quite similar below, as well as a heat embossed sentiment. And for the foiled card I used a Waffle flowers thank you die cut to the front of the card to finish it off with a few gold sequins to match. I really enjoyed all three techniques. They were all completely different, created really fun fab cards, and I really, really, really loved how the last melted star card came out. I think it's my favourite out of the three. So in the comments below, I'd love to know which one out of these three is your favourite and why. If you enjoyed today's video, why not give it a thumbs up? And if you're not already, why not think about subscribing to the YouTube channel? For 10% discount at the Wow Embossing Powder shop, you can just use the code you can see on screen. And until next time, happy crafting!